Hi, I'm Dr. Mary Hill Wagner, Hillwagner, and I've been asked to give you a virtual reading of my book, Girlz N the Hood, a Memoir of Mama in South Central Los Angeles. And it's coming to you from the Pact Press, a subsidiary of Regal House Publishing in 2021. I'm going to read to you from the first chapter of my book. It is a memoir about my mother who taught us to work hard and love hard and protect the weak. My mother was plotting murder at the kitchen table again. "You shouldn't put up with that bullshit, Pat," my mother said. "Just get yourself a big boiling pot and wait for that son of a bitch to go to sleep. Put that pot on nice and long and put in a little lye. Go in, shake the bed so he knows it's you, and dump that shit over his lying, wife-beaten, cheating-ass head." I stood in the kitchen on the red carnation milk crate. I tried to keep the dishes from clattering and clanging, but I just knew that my mother was going to glance over, notice my 5-year-old self, and yell something about getting out of grown folks' business. I knew that as soon as they started talking about Pat's husband, Gene, I was supposed to excuse myself and leave the room. It was risky to keep doing the dishes, but I wanted to hear what happened. Even though I was doing the dishes as I was supposed to, I wouldn't have been surprised if she kicked the crate from under me and let my head hit the tile floor, just to teach me a lesson about snooping. My mother didn't like kids getting all up in grown folks' conversations. Pat said, "But I can't, I just can't. You know I love that man, and he say he real sorry." "You is a simple ass bitch," my mother said to her best friend in the world. "You gonna get enough of not listening to what I'm saying. I hope I don't have to go to your funeral or send that good-for-nothing man of his." Pat was a very tall woman who could reach behind anything on the top of the refrigerator without getting on her tippy toes. Now, she sat in one of the flowered padded dinette chairs with her long tan brown arms draped over the back. She could almost reach to the floor. Her wig seemed to be on sideways. Her apple red lipstick was smeared, and her eyes were bloodshot. My mother got up and went over to the refrigerator, reached in, and got out a red popsicle. She handed it to her friend. Pat held it against the knot over her right eye. "You know what I've been telling you. I told you and told you that the man was going to raise his hand to you one day. Remember? When you told me that he couldn't keep his Johnson in his pants and he was running around with every little hoe in that pagan-ass church you go to, I said, a man that will cheat on his woman will beat on his woman. I know you remember when I said that shit. And I said back then that you should put a cap in his ass or leave him. I told you those was your choices." I thought about sending up a wish and crossing my fingers so they would be sure not to notice me. But it's hard to do dishes with crossed fingers. And if my mother discovered the dishes weren't done, in addition to the fact that I was snooping, well, I would get a wake-up whooping. Those were the worst kind because you couldn't even pretend to outrun the blows when you were asleep. Pat pushed her big body away from the table and scratched the chair loudly on the floor. She smoothed down her sundress that had giant daisies on it, almost matching the chairs. The dress barely covered her bottom. She tried to get her wig on to right, but it still hung crooked. "I gotta go get dinner on, say," she said, using her pet name for my mother. "I'll call you later." Pat came over to me and handed me the popsicle. I took it, although I was still pretending to be invisible. I set the popsicle on the counter and finished the dishes. My mother stood and accepted a hug from Pat. I climbed down from the crate awkwardly with the popsicle in my hand. I tried to tiptoe out of the kitchen past my mother. My mother grabbed the back of my collar. My mother stood over me like a large dog, but instead of whipping me, she said, "Don't you tell nobody what we've been talking about up in here. You hear? We don't need to add gossip to your sins. You hear me, girl?" "Yes, ma'am," I mumbled. The next day, all was forgotten, as far as I could see. The whole house was in uproar because Uncle O was getting out of jail. I still don't know why it was made out to be such a big deal when he got out. Uncle O always seems to be getting out of one jail or another. Uncle O ducked as he came through the front door. His real name was Lorenzo Gordon Sr., but everyone seemed to think it was really funny to call him Lo. He was even taller than Pat. He could see the top of the refrigerator all the way to the back. His head was shaved. He was bald now. He'd grown a pencil mustache. It stood out on his caramel-colored lip. He said it made him look like Earl Flynn, whoever that was. Uncle Lo was carrying his usual can of Schlitz malt liquor, 16-ounce can, because an 8-ounce can was for guys with sugar in their shoes. His wife, Annette, who was almost as tall as our living room picture window and just about as wide, broke through the crowd of children and adults in the tiny living room and threw her arm around him. We called her Auntie because Aunt Annette was too hard to say. Uncle Lo put his massive hands over Auntie's butt. Annette, I got your present right here, Uncle O said as he pushed Auntie up against him. Y'all keep that smut for later, boy. Get your ass in here and say hello to your big sister, my mother said. Tank, how the hell did I miss you standing over there? Uncle O said, giving my mother a huge hug and a smooch on the cheek. I met a couple of guys in the joint I might want to introduce you to. Boy, don't nobody want your jailbird-ass friends, my mother said, and everyone laughed loudly. And somebody brought out a few cases of beer and bottles of I.W. Harper whiskey. The grown-ups started flowing out onto the back porch. The kids got plopped down in front of the TV. Gunsmoke was on. Only I went after the adults. Girl, what the hell you think you doing? My mother said. I ain't no fool. You just want to get all up in grown folks' conversation. I just want to see if somebody wants some ice or something, I said. My mother looked down at me and raised her hand. But just before any blow could be struck, Uncle O lifted me up onto his lap and hugged me against his wall-like chest. I could see my mother over his right shoulder. What's wrong with you, Tank? I don't want to hear no crying babies at my coming home party. Crying babies is sad. And I ain't had nothing but sad for 6 months. Uncle Lo told her and started to tickle me and carried me onto the back porch. I laughed so much, I almost peed. Lo, you're going to spoil her, my mother said. Then she crossed the room and planted her bulk in a folding chair. Then she took out a pack of roll-your-own cigarettes called Bugler, tapped some tobacco into the paper, and licked the cigarettes shut. She lit it and shook the match out and dropped it on the stone floor. She threw her left arm across her massive chest, propped up her cigarette hand, and puffed away. I sat on Uncle O's lap like I had 100 times before. Sticking 2 fingers into my mouth, I began to suck on them. I closed my eyes and I pretended I was falling asleep.